Welcome to Old Man Blerd. Hi, I'm John, and along with my friend Terrence, we make up a pair of lifelong geeks who happen to be black, over 50, but are certainly nerds first and foremost. The Alpha Geek and the Omega Freak. And we welcome everyone. And by everyone, we mean nerds, blerds, and bleaks, cosplayers and role players, geeks and freaks, Marvel zombies and distinguished competitors, Trekkies, Star Warriors, Batmaniacs, and Spider fans, Warhams, Whovians, AFOLs, adult fans of Legos, Tolkienites, Weeaboos, Supernatural hunters and otakus, Ava geeks, Bro stars and Sistars, Pokemon trainers, Potterheads, Bronies, Whovians, Browncoats, and Scoobies, and all nerd properties in between. Because we are over 50, we've seen a thing or two, and have experience, long experience, with a lot of these properties. So thank you for listening to Old Man Blerd.
Hello. Hello.
Hello?
I can hear you and I can see you.
Good. See my short head?
Yes. I see it looks like some cola product above you.
Yeah, it might be.
It says 80.
It might be. Oh, it's actually a food bag.
Oh, I see. Oh yeah, there's Ziploc
Turned
bags.
sideways.
Nice.
It's the angle. I'm going, huh? What? Okay.
Nice. All right. Well, we're here.
Choose your target, my friend.
All right. So we will start with welcome to Old Man Blerd, where two 50 plus each nerds reminisce and complain and whine and debate and discuss all sorts of nerd type properties from our unique perspective as 50-something African American nerds. That's a pretty decent introduction to Old Man Blerd. Please like and subscribe if you hear this and like this. Hopefully you do. We will try to only anger the most opinionated, which is sort of all nerds. All nerds are
I was going to
really
say everybody. Come on.
all nerds are real opinionated. They have some opinions. They have some thoughts. So what nerdy thing have you been up to for the past week?
Nothing really.
Nothing?
Nothing. I have become addicted to Pluto TV Godzilla station.
That's nerdy. The Kaju thing is certainly not even nerd adjacent. That's full on nerd. Full on black nerd, Blerd. I did see, speaking of kaiju, I did see just yesterday the trailer for, I guess it was Godzilla and King Kong. What was it? Kingdom? New Kingdom?
Yep. New Empire.
New Empire, yes. And so is this from the same makers of the Godzilla versus King Kong and Godzilla King Monsters? It's the same production.
Yes. There's all the legendary.
So this is the I guess the fourth in the series, because wasn't there Godzilla, then there was King Kong.
There's Godzilla, King Kong, King of the Monsters, Godzilla versus King Kong. So this is number 5.
Oh, 5. Yeah. So I was I was both I did geek out a little bit when it looked like King Kong had the metal mecha sort of fist. I just completely had a suspension of belief on it, because I was like, wow, what? How much time? That's a lot of metal. How did they explain it to? I just let it wash over me and just enjoyed him having a metal fist. So for
Well, that's
those
one
of
of the things about the legendary / Warner Brothers adaptations. They take all the old stuff
Mhm.
and find a way to modernize it because they kind of gave him his electrical powers from Godzilla versus King Kong in the 60s.
Mhm.
Except they gave it into a glove.
Yeah, I mean, at first I thought the trailer was for a Transformers movie, and for whatever reason, I think it might have been my age actually, because I feel like when Transformers the cartoon came out, I feel like I was probably 15, 16. So I think I was a bit older when that came out. Like G.I. Joe,
No,
I might have been 14, 13. I don't know. Am I getting
okay.
this wrong?
Yes, you are, because when Transformers came out, I was about 15.
Okay. I'm looking it up right now because I know that there's
And then
all
they did
kinds
the
of there's
computer
yeah, there's all kinds
CGI.
of geeks that are probably like, "What? How dare you not know this?"
Yeah,
Um
you're forgiven today. You're given a pass.
It was 1980s. Okay, it doesn't History of Transformers, the iconic 80s. Well, come on, give me like some dates. I'm looking for dates. It's not giving me dates yet. It's giving me a
And
whole lot of pictures
yeah,
and let's see. Okay, Transformers cartoon date. That let's get our Google search and Google trademark. Uh Let's see. I don't want images. I just want the date. Launched in 1984. So I was 14 when it came out.
yep.
Okay. Um, I feel like for whatever reason, like I remember watching the Transformers. I also remember watching the GoBots. And I remember watching Tranzor Z, which is Manzinger in Japan. And I'm pretty sure Go Lion, which is Voltron. But for whatever reason, I didn't resonate with Transformers as much. I feel like it's skewed younger than those other ones. Am I misremembering?
No, you're partially right because GoBots was mainly designed for those under the age of 10.
Yeah,
Yeah.
GoBots for sure. Transformers skewed a little older, but I mean, I liked G.I. Joe, and that
Well,
had to have
that's
been at the
also
same
because
time.
yeah, GI Joe was more aggressive. The only thing about GI Joe was blue versus red lasers. Okay.
Sure, sure. And I mean, you had who's the guy that had the silver head? And I know people are
Destro.
just Destro, yes. I remember Destro and of course Cobra Commander
See
and
me, it was
Snake Eyes and Storm Shadow. I remember all those guys.
I remember it, the bad thing about us geeks was certain lines burn in our heads
Mm-hmm.
and we wind up using them.
Mm-hmm.
Burgess Meredith did the cartoon movie.
Of G.I. Joe?
Yes.
Oh,
He
that
played
checks
the
out.
parts he played the partial Snake Man. I forgot what the name was.
The
But he said
partial
be
Snake
silent
Man.
or be silence. And I said that to somebody like, what? And then I realized where it came from. It's like, oh,
Deep,
oh.
deep cut. I just remember the only thing I remember from quoting G.I. Joe is, and that's one to grow on. Wasn't that G.I. Joe?
And
And learning is half
He-Man.
the battle. That was it.
Yeah, and He-Man. He-Man was one to grow on. That was Filmation. But then again,
Sure.
so was G.I. Joe.
But I feel like learning is half the battle. Maybe that was actually G.I. Joe. Learning was half the
That was
battle.
G.I. Joe. One to grow on was He-Man.
Okay, so I'm getting all those blurred together because they all feel like they all hit right when I was, 12, 13, 14. But for whatever reason, Transformers did not really land with me. So so when the Transformer movies, the Michael Bay movies came out, I was super not interested. And when I saw the metal hand, I think that was one of the sort of earlier parts of that trailer. I was like, oh, this is just Transformers. And I was like, whatever, I don't care. And then I was like, oh no, this is Godzilla King Kong. What is it? New Empire?
Yes.
Yes. Well,
This is Godzilla King Kong, the Godzilla Monsterverse is the last connection of Legendary with Warner Brothers.
Mm-hmm.
They are separating after that for whatever reason. Discovery is getting rid of a lot of their stuff, but that one's profitable enough that they are keeping that connection, but they are separating Legendary in
Well,
that sense.
there's two people in it that I just adore. Dan Stevens, who played Legion in the Legion X-Men television show, which I will fight anyone who disagrees with me that believes that wasn't arguably the best X-Men property ever released. It was so good. At least genuine to the insanity that mutants, particularly telepathic ones, are. And it was great. And it actually took a real risk. I won't ruin it. I won't spoil it for anybody, but there was a significant bad thing that happened that the main character did, and they didn't let him off the hook for doing it. And it was great. But for whatever reason, you can only own some of those on Blu-ray. Like you can own the first season and I think the third season, but you can't own the second season.
Disney again.
Yeah,
that was during the 20th Century Fox. What isn't our first dope is that Disney has turned over this division because they want to get out of it. They have made a mutual agreement with Sony.
Oh, and see, X-Men properties are essentially Sony, right? So Legion would probably belong to that.
Well, no. I'm talking about as in from here on, all their discs are you'll see Disney, Hercules 3 or whatever, Milana, all of them will be from Sony as far as the disc goes.
Oh, I see what you mean. Okay. Yeah,
they're like, you still can produce it. We're just not doing it.
I just don't know why the Legion episodes I would own it. It's one of the few. I mean, I've owned most of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Many of them I was like, I really don't need to own this, and I traded them for something else. But Legion, I thought, was just stellar, and it had Jermaine Tennant, I think is his last name, from Flight of the Conchords and What We Do in the Shadows, and he was great in it, and it really was pretty trippy and just good. So Dan Stevens is one of the characters in that new Godzilla King Kong movie, and Brian Tyree Henry, who plays Paperboy in the Atlanta television show, which is, I think, an excellent television show, just exemplary Black surrealism. Atlanta, the Vince Staples show, they're just surreal and weird, and they take funny risks, and he was one of the main characters in Atlanta, and so he's also in that Godzilla King Kong, The New Empire. So that already sort of intrigues me about going.
Cool.
So, yeah, so I'm a little more, but I didn't. The trailer lost me a little bit with the human characters, which is often what happens with Godzilla movies. It's
yeah, they do one of three things. They're too serious,
sure,
or they're just right, which is the rare one,
or they're too funny,
or they're too funny.
And this felt like they were erring on the side of too funny. And I don't know, when you have giant monsters that are about to destroy the planet, I don't know how much levity you have. I feel like a good chunk of what you would be going through is like, holy S, holy S, holy S. That's edited. H. Yes. Holy, I mean, that's all I would be saying if you saw kaiju running around, erupting from the pyramids. So
I won't deny that.
I wouldn't be like, well, that's very weird, and let's crack some quips. So but it's a good time to be a kaiju fan, really, the last 5 years, 6 years, right? I mean, there's been pretty much a kaiju movie every year since probably Pacific Rim, right?
Well, yeah, you could say that. That was the one that reunited it, was Pacific Rim.
Sure.
And then they also had another Godzilla. It was the last, I think it was Godzilla Final Wars, and I think that was 2010. I could be wrong. But that
Well,
was the last one where basically Toho said we're shutting down for a while.
well, and like I said, that counts as nerdy. If you say you haven't been doing anything nerdy, watching a channel of Godzilla. No, I haven't been doing anything nerdy. I just camped inside of Mile High Comics for a month. It's like, what? What? Come on.
Oh, come on. It's
You're
not nerdy to
watching
us
a
because
literal channel of nothing but Godzilla films. And that's crazy enough because there are enough Godzilla films for a channel. I'm assuming it's also Gamera,
oh
Mothra.
yeah. Oh yeah, they do other things. I mean, they did the one that almost got an Oscar.
An Oscar for, I'm assuming, technical effects.
No, for the actual story.
Screenplay?
Yeah.
There was a Godzilla film that, I mean, I'm not casting shade or throwing shade on Godzilla. What? I didn't mean to sound so questioning. Like, what? Godzilla got a screenwriting Oscar
Yeah, it was all
nomination?
Monsters Attack. It was all Monsters Attack. Any kaiju buff of a certain age will remember it, even though it basically came out when I was born. But this kid is bullied. He's
Mm-hmm.
bullied, and he's kidnapped because he sees a theft happen.
Uh-huh.
And the only thing that's helping him get through is he keeps fantasizing being on Monster Island with Godzilla's son, talking to him as his best friend.
Okay, I'm gonna ask this again. This was nominated for a screenplay, screenwriting
Yes, yes,
nomination?
because it is one of the biggest. It was, how should I say? It was Deadpool before Deadpool, because the irony is that they are fantastical creatures in the movie that they star in.
Okay. Okay.
Now, how often does that happen?
That doesn't yeah. Speaking of Deadpool, I saw that trailer as well. The Deadpool Wolverine trailer.
Mm-hmm.
And I was intrigued. I mean, in terms of comic book team fandom, I would argue for me it's a probably a tie between Fantastic Four and X-Men. You know, I would say that's probably the two I like the most. And so, I see Colossus, I see Wolverine in a trailer. I'm kind of like, oh, okay, you've kind of got me. You got me at hello.
I understand.
I'm not a Deadpool fan particularly. I liked Deadpool 1.0 when it was known as Spider-Man.
Okay. But
Someone,
you're showing
yeah,
100 between the two of us, the 100 years that we represent.
yeah, Deadpool 1.0 is Spider-Man. I mean, oh, he's quippy, he's got a mask with big eyes. Yeah, it's red
He can
costume. Yeah,
heal
it's
really fast.
sure. Sure he uses guns and katana, but in general, he's sort of Spider-Man. He's a little crasser. And I'm by no means any kind of shrinking violet or prude when it comes to naughty language. Blue, but I don't think you always have to go blue. You don't always you don't
Well,
always
that's
have
because
to. You've got talent. You
everybody's
don't
not
need
as
to go
creative as
blue.
us. Everybody's not as creative as us. Oh boy.
Well, I just think it's easy. I mean, when I have done stand up and uh you know, I would know that every comedian had your sort of required jokes that would be getting a crowd to laugh if they were a little looter. I mean, you just had to have that in your Swiss Army knife of jokes. You just, because some audiences you can tell it's like, oh, they just like they like humor about all of the things. I'm keeping this PG. Why am I keeping this PG? I don't actually have this podcast skewed for children. YouTube asks, "Is this for kids?" And I say no, and yet I still avoid cursing and and all of the jokes that I could make. So
That's because that's my job.
right. But it's easy, I think. I mean, at a certain point it is very easy to write dirty jokes. I mean,
Well, it's not just that. It's some of the stuff that people, again, as we have talked about previously, the object or the subject of discussion, negativity that they focus on. You're like, are you really serious? I mean, really? Because I mean, some of the stuff that people scream at, and I'm talking about physical, they the same thing about words. Think about it. If you Deadpool saved your life, are you really going to take time to correct how he talks to you? You
Of
know,
course not. Of course not.
I mean,
I would be absolutely pleased as punch if I got saved by Deadpool, and I would not correct him on his language choices.
exactly. I mean, it's more like certain men, maybe Gunny. I think that was the name he went by from Full Metal Jacket, as in the actual actor.
Mhm.
Uh, he might listen to him. You understand? He because of his age. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? And
Mhm.
might listen to certain people like, okay, don't talk like that around my child. He might listen to that. But as a whole, his filter is off and on.
Sure.
In other
And
words, you respect it if you point it out, but that's one of the humors that they don't point it out. They just let him go.
well, and I think that Brian Posehn, the comedian, he wrote a pretty decent run of Deadpool. I think that the Rob Liefeld, you know, pre-image image artists and writers, were doing the New Mutants run that he premiered in. And they were fine. I mean, it was definitely it for me it just skewed a bit younger for me, but I have read good comics with Deadpool in them. So he has his moments for sure. I had that first appearance of Deadpool, and I remember I was working a booth, my own booth, selling comic books, just comic books I wanted to get rid of. And there was this young woman that was like, wanted to buy that issue. And this was way before the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And I was kind of like, I was like, yeah, $76. And, probably no more than 3 years later, that comic book's like $1,000, I think.
Yeah,
So, I mean, I know for a fact that the comic book collection that I let go of in like 20, gosh, what would it have been? Probably 2018, 2017. No, it's
right.
got to have been earlier than that. I know that comic collection is probably a $250,000 collection now, because it was I had almost a full run of Spider-Man, except for the first 30 issues. I had like the entire Simonson run of Thor. I had, Byrne run of this. I had the Miller run of Daredevil. I had a ton of comics. And this was sold before the Marvel Cinematic Universe. So it was like, I felt bad. I was like, $76. I really shouldn't be charging her that. And she's walking around because it was probably in very fine, maybe near mint, because I don't even think I read that copy. And now she's like walking around with $1,000 comic. But so the nerdy things that I was up to get circle back around to the original the original conversation was, I watched that trailer and the Godzilla trailer.
Cool.
So that was that.
Question.
Huh?
Question.
Yes. Possible answer.
What is the most successful live action, if not animated, superhero movie?
The most successful animated movie, or
One
because
of
that's if
both.
you're
I have a point I'm trying to prove. I have a point
okay,
I'm trying to
I give up. What is the most successful one?
Well, if you really think about it, they'll say the Avengers, but going solo, Spider-Man Far From Home.
Is the most successful comic book movie?
I'm talking about in modern times. Batman still is the top overall because of how he changed and how much he made during that period.
Sure. I mean, that was a lot of money. I thought that the Avengers Endgame made like $1 billion though, or pretty doggone
Yeah, but I'm
close.
not counting them because they're a team. I'm talking about solo character.
Oh, individual character.
Right.
Individual character, probably, yeah.
Okay.
Batman. I think Batman, Legend, The Dark Knight Returns. Was it called The Dark Knight Returns, or just The Dark
Yeah, I
Knight?
think so. But
No, it's The Dark Knight. See, this is where we show our age. I'm like, I've seen it, but was it called The Dark Knight? We're
no,
nerds. We're not anal retentive ones.
Not yet.
not not yet. I think it was just the Dark Knight is the. I'm just to see. Yeah, it was the Dark Knight. Yeah, I thought so.
Okay.
I own it, but I've realistically, it's as great as it is. I've really only seen it probably twice,
It's okay. It's okay,
and I
Dr.
own it.
Decker.
I
I
own the
said it's
whole.
okay.
Hmm?
It's okay. It's all right.
No, it's good.
You're forgiven. You're forgiven.
I know they're gonna revoke my nerd cred.
I know. Well, don't feel bad. I turned in a couple of cards long ago.
Yeah,
Different ones for different reasons.
probably so. I think
But
that.
my
Yeah,
oh, go
well,
ahead.
I was just gonna say that I am not a big watcher of movies repeatedly. Like I was. I mean, when I was teenager in my 20s, um I think that yeah, I watched certain movies. I don't know how many times. I think at this point the only movies that I've watched multiple times in recent memory is probably Raising Arizona because I
Okay,
think
now
that
you're showing your age.
because I think the Coen brothers. Do these balloons
Right?
blow up in funny shapes? Not unless you think round is funny.
Like I said, yeah, you're showing your age.
Sure, this was great Nick
It's,
Cage. This was, I but
it's
I mean
time for John to go out to the pasture.
that's fine. But I mean I just that the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there's just not very many of them that have it's almost like empty calories. I mean, I love those movies. I think they're great, yada yada yada. But none of them have well, Black Panther probably. I've probably watched Black Panther a couple of times, more than a couple times. Uh but and it's not even necessarily my favorite in particular. It's just I do
Mm,
find it good, and I think it was one of those ones where I went to see it at the theater twice because
right.
I felt like my melanin card was going to get revoked because I was like, look, I'm going to see this movie and I'm going to make sure it's successful. It was the one time
That
it was the one
kind of
time
reminded me what I did to my sister.
it was the one time when I was super militant about a thing. I was like, no, they're not gonna say this movie's not popular, so I'm gonna see it twice at the theater. And I think a lot of brothers and sisters did that. It
Well, my
was
most militant family member, my sister,
uh-huh.
I told her, I said, I'm going to take you aside and talk to you about this before you go. You are not going to embarrass us black geeks.
Right.
That is not happening.
Well, my parents went to see it, I remember too. I think that because it's not a forced representation like we've been talking about, and we have
It's
definitely
organic.
expressed, yeah, it's organic. It's an ancient, not ancient, but it is an antique, sort of, certainly an antique uh black superhero character, and I he there needs to be respect. You need to bring some respect to his name, the Black Panther. So I was like, yeah, I'm going to buy some merch. I'm going to see it twice. I'm going to tell every person I know to go see it because, there was a real danger when that came out. People were kind of worried. They were like, well, it's a black character. Is it really going to do anything? Because you got to remember that movie came out before the George Floyd Black Lives Matter thing, I'm pretty sure. Or did it?
It did. It did.
I'm pretty sure.
It,
Yeah. So that was before this most modern wave of black consciousness. Um,
well,
so I was like, it could go either way. And at that point, I don't even think the Marvel Cinematic Universe was as popular yet. I
it
think
was
they
on its way. It was on the upchuck, as the saying goes.
Yeah, it was up, and I think now it's clearly in its decline, at least if box office sales are any sort of indication of that. Although I think the Deadpool Wolverine, I think the geeks are waiting for X-Men. I think the geeks are waiting for X-Men. I think some specific geeks, myself included, might be waiting for Fantastic Four, but I don't think you're going to get a whole lot of people to some of this other stuff. I feel bad. I feel bad that Madam Web didn't do well or the Marvels didn't do well. Um I think some of it may be sexism. Some of it just might not be. Those aren't real familiar characters to even tried and true geeks. I mean, I've probably read Madam Web, uh, maybe a few issues, but she wasn't like a reoccurring character in Spider-Man like all the time. She was just here and there on occasion, you know, and that you'd have an interaction with her and then that'd be it. It wasn't like that was his Punisher or his, or I mean, I'm sure she appeared even less frequently than the Punisher did. And for a long time, they didn't have the Punisher in every issue of Spider-Man. It was once a year, maybe.
Well, there's a couple things that you brought up. Number one, as I mentioned before, Madam Web should have been Glenn Close because of the age. They could have had Dakota do her as the younger storyline setup or flashbacks even. Because I think that's part of it is that we are willing to accept a lot, but we're getting a little tired of just changes that seems like they're just doing just to do them. You know.
Well, and I think
And
that
like we were saying, like you said about the ancient one, that's a good example.
Mhm.
Saying sorry later doesn't help that you basically change the story.
Sure. And I think that the only reason why I was hot about the Ancient One in the Doctor Strange, so just for listeners, the Doctor Strange mentor, the Ancient One, in the comics was, I think, sort of vaguely Tibetan. I don't know if he was specifically Tibetan, but it seemed to allude pretty strongly to him being Tibetan. And there probably were later issues that I'm not remembering where they explicitly made him Tibetan. And to me, as a Vajrayana Buddhist, Tibetan Buddhist, certainly Tibetan Buddhist adjacent, I was like, yeah, he should, do that. But I think that people were concerned, producers, the bean counters were concerned that if they made the Ancient One Tibetan, that Chinese audiences would not see it. And I think that has been increasingly part of their calculus with these movies, which is why they were concerned about the Black Panther. They were like, "Oh, is it going to play in China?" Because a very small percentage of Chinese movie-going audiences can see a movie and make you nearly, $250 million, just with a movie.
That's absolutely correct. The problem we have there is two things, and this goes more political than geek, but it's true. China culture versus China statement doesn't always go with our fantasy or our escapism.
Sure, and there
And
has
we're not
been
talking about the Cold War. We're not talking about, we're not talking about any of that. We're talking about just their outlook on sexuality, their outlook on women. I mean, now to give credit where credit's due, speaking of the Black Panther, when it came out, they said a lot of them like it because it was a dark black movie. And a lot of people were offended. They were going, what about race? They weren't talking about race. They were talking about it being filmed at night, being black all the time, And see, you have to read up on that because first thing people thought about when they heard black movie, they thought about race.
Sure.
And that's our flaw.
Our perceptual filter. Well, and
yeah.
I do think that there has been some occasional missteps and insensitivity from Asian audiences when it comes to black representation. And so
Don't get me started.
Yeah, I mean, there's any number of Japanese anime characters that are jet black with giant lips, and it's like it's
I was not going to go there, but yep.
hella problematic. I'm looking at you, Dragon Ball Z. I'm looking.
Yeah, that's what I was talking about.
Yeah,
Dragon Ball Z. Yep.
So there has been some problems, and I think that when you're a homogenous culture that has really little to any immigration, and certainly not immigration from Africans or African Americans or Black people, the diaspora, yeah, they fill in the blanks with some stereotypes. So there was some
Exactly.
concern there. And so yeah, I was concerned about the Ancient One. I do feel like, and I, talk to John Cena. I mean, he had to apologize about calling Taiwan a country, for right prior to the Peacemaker movie. What movie was it
Yes.
that he had to apologize? Or was it, no, it was, I think
It wasn't the
was it,
maker. It
huh?
wasn't the Peacemaker because that was a TV show. It was the
No, yeah,
Peacemaker.
it was a Fast and the Furious movie, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
And he had to say if I recall correctly, had to say his apology in Mandarin. Now,
And see, that's one of the problems we have with our culture now with geekdom, is and like we're trying to have a separate world in our discussions, but
mhm.
sometimes they cross over. And this is a good example that I, as a fan, am offended by someone's entitlement to force their idea on fandom. I mean, that's why we go to fandom, is to escape reality, you know. And
Well,
here's
and
someone going to force a negative or a positive, because positives can be forced, but they can be forced organically. And nobody would complain and go, yeah, that makes sense. Don't like it. I do like it. Either way, but that makes sense. But
this was solely just because of a statement about Taiwan being a country. I mean, that's talk about a flex, right? I mean, China
exactly.
got him to a, I mean, that's how powerful China's audience numbers are to these producers, because like I said, if they've got 1 billion people, so if just a quarter of their population sees a movie, that's millions and millions of dollars. And I think that those producers and those production companies really like seeing those numbers, because your film can bomb in America, bomb, and still make its money back in going over to China.
It
So,
can. And that's the
I
good
think,
news.
but then if that's the case, then they're going to start creating some censorship, and I am 100% against any kind of censorship, particularly, of course, when it comes to the stuff that I am a fan of.
Oh,
So,
well, not just that. I mean, some of it we show our age. And the best example is the Star Wars, the last three, the Finn character being
hmm
black.
hmm
And just the way China acted changed the story to a degree, because he was supposed to be one of the focuses or foci of the series. Hence him discovering that he could use the force a little.
hmm
But, you know, first poster, if he wasn't in the stormtrooper outfit, you just didn't see him in China.
hmm.
In the
Well,
second one, it's the same thing. And when he did Pacific Rim 2, the same actor,
hmm
again, his character was ostracized or put back. Just as Icarus Elba was in the first one because of China. And it's like, this is where we have to use, I'm going to be offensive. We have to use our nants and say, what the hell are you guys doing?
well, yeah, I do think, because the reality is that when we're talking about, excuse me, when we're talking about freedom of expression and freedom to, have these properties be exported as they are, the idea that they're going to be so heavily censored, it's like, what's the point? And at a certain point, you really have to just stand for these freedoms. That's one of the things that I think, we'll discuss it, I'm sure, in our political podcast roundtable, which will be debuting soon. Politrix, the politics of insight. When you have a country that's that powerful, that's able to take another powerful country and censor itself just for money, that's a dangerous precedent, in my opinion.
Yes, because
That's bad, because then they can start to flex and say, well, we'd like to have all of the characters be whatever, and then pretty soon you're going to water down some of these intellectual properties, and it's just not going to be fun for anyone. And I guess you could continue to make movies solely for the Chinese audiences and have them heavily censored and all kinds of different rough edges that are particularly American be polished down. But I think that's a real bad idea.
Well, yeah, because I mean, they were talking about Russia, Iran. Only one who doesn't have, to a degree, the first one that started ironically was the UK.
Mhm.
But the UK was interesting because they didn't mind the words and they didn't mind nudity because both were natural. They mind the scary scene
Sure, some of the
or the
violence.
alien or the alien or whatever. That was theirs. But
Sure.
the other cultures, it is more of, okay, this is against our faith. Or the best example, China, good example of China is the toy maker.
Mhm.
The toy maker, the villain in Giggle, the 60th anniversary Doctor Who episode.
Oh, okay. Played by Neil Patrick Harris.
Exactly. When he was first created, he was the celestial toy maker.
And he was sort of
Now
an
they
Asian stereotype, if I recall correctly.
exactly, but still, that's neither here nor there. Why I say it's neither here or there, because it was obvious he was UK, British, white, European,
Sure.
and he was in Asian outfit or attire. But my point is this: that doesn't matter. Now, someone would split hairs and say, "Well, I'm offended," but think of a person who goes to another culture and they just enjoy that culture
Sure.
and
There's
they
a
pick
fine
up
line between appreciation and appropriation.
exactly. And the character never appropriated anything. He just dressed that way. You see what I'm saying? I mean, I understand what you're saying. It's like the indigenous costumes they have at Halloween every year. I
Sure.
understand what you're saying there. But my point with this is that was the whole point, was that he was supposed to be high up, in the order of power.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the new Doctor Who, they kind of say you could have been celestial
Sure.
because they did not want to offend China
Okay.
or some other thing. And then once, a good example of what I just said is I went to, of all things, a restaurant
Mm-hmm.
and they had on a Chinese channel,
Mm-hmm.
which is no big deal. But the guy actually made a sword.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a documentary, and he was saying, "Yeah, I put my soul in it." Quickly as he said that, I mean, I worked hard and put all my years of experience. China took away the essence of what he was saying. Anybody who knows know he really didn't put his soul in it.
Sure.
But the
But
culture can allow him that moment.
sure, they sort of, yeah. And that's the thing, is that I think that when we worry about things like censorship, when we worry about these things, there's a reason, because at a certain point, there are any number of places and any number of people that could be offended by something that is an American sort of value. I think that's one of the reasons why we have to worry about censorship in this country and people wanting to ban books and things. Certainly,
Exactly.
children shouldn't necessarily read something that is R-rated or X-rated when they're in elementary school. Obvious, that makes sense. But you start getting rid of To Kill a Mockingbird and Fahrenheit 451 and The Color Purple and The Hate U Give. Come on. Some of this stuff is like you're just being difficult. And
You're being polite, my brother.
you're not being very democratic. And so, but I think that the world has sort of veered towards authoritarianism. So obviously geek culture is no exception, to
Well, geek
being a big
culture is one of the most powerful things because we have the one thing that they're afraid of in all countries, and that is story.
sure.
That is the most powerful of all things out of, like I told you once about the four languages, and
hmm
that is music, food, you know,
sure.
and story.
Sure.
Story is one of the most powerful because it contains in connection, because it contains all of those things. And when you look at it, each country, they want to control how that is, but that's not going to work. I mean, when the Avengers came out, Putin had to make the Guardians as his take on the Avengers. And
Mhm.
even he didn't like it. It's like, that's because it represents something that you're not doing. The United States will do the Cliff Note edition of a lot of cultures because that's make it so it's digested for the masses.
Sure.
But us being nerds, geeks, whatever, we dive in and that's how we can understand, okay, this is how you say it, this is why you do it. And that's our jam. But when it comes culturally in other cultures, they actually hurt the intention by modifying it.
Sure.
I mean,
Well,
like, I'm a Star Trek freak, and
mhm.
to the point, they had the universal translator, and a couple of times they've done it where the universal translator, they're all wearing it,
Mhm.
is turned off. And then Chekhov is speaking Russian,
Mhm.
you know, Hulu is speaking Chinese,
Mhm.
or her is speaking,
Actually, Sulu would
you,
be Japanese, I believe. Yeah.
well, they kind of actually said it got merged. That's the way they explain it.
Oh, really? Yeah, because
You
Sulu
know,
would be Japanese. So George Takei is a
yeah, but I'm talking
Japanese
about,
American.
like, we're talking about 300 years old in language, they are merged.
But
Hey, it's kind of like the South, okay?
sure,
Versus, being more influenced by Spanish, as in Mexican Spanish, versus Spanish from Spain, because then they'll tell you
sure.
not the
It's
same.
kind of like Portuguese from Brazil versus Portuguese from Portugal.
Exactly.
I see. I gotcha.
But the
Well,
point is that wouldn't happen if it was done by China or Russia.
sure. They
They
might
wouldn't
not.
they wouldn't recognize the languages. They wouldn't enjoy the languages or the cultural differences, and the fact that they were unified towards the goal.
Well, and I think that's the unfortunate thing about this turn that America might be taking. And again, this would be much more the political podcast, but I think that when you stop, one of our greatest strengths happens to be diversity, diversity of thought, opinion, religion, viewpoint, life experience. And these homogenous cultures don't have that. And because they don't have that, they don't have the innovation that comes when cultures and different ideas and different groups of people run into each other and spark these sort of moments of creativity. I mean, that is
Oh,
what, I mean, you wouldn't have gotten rock and roll, you wouldn't have gotten any number of things that come from
well,
the kinds of foods that we have in this country with these, sort of these collaborations that happen when one culture meets another and influence it, and it becomes like that fusion.
well, the
But
best example of that is, have you ever seen the mockumentary? Because I love mockumentaries. Oh my God.
which mockumentary?
The CSA.
TSA?
CSA.
PSA?
CSA. Confederate States of America.
Oh, CSA. Gotcha.
Yes.
CPTV, they all rhyme. So, no, I have not. Most of the
Okay.
mockumentaries
Well,
that
here's
I've
the
seen have been Christopher Guest mockumentaries. Spinal Tap, A Mighty Wind, Waiting for Guffman, Best in Show.
see. Well, see, I love those too, but I
Most
like
of the,
What If Dragons Were Real? What If Mermaids Were Real? But CSA is the one we're talking about at the moment. So basically, Confederates won.
oh, okay. A Philip
Okay,
K.
so
Dick situation.
oh yeah, and why I'm going with it is because you brought up exactly what happened. The first thing they said, now of course this is a mockumentary.
Hmm.
So this came out in about the 90s. So first of all, like, we had Cops, the TV show.
Hmm.
Their TV show was Runaways,
Okay.
as in runaway slaves.
Oh no. So when did this CSA movie come out?
I don't know. My cousin showed it to me because he had it, on his digital download, and I watched it and I was like, oh my God, this is just wrong. But it was so interesting because why I brought it up is like, uh, Lincoln lived because he wasn't
Hmm.
assassinated, but he had to go to Canada. And Canada had become more diversified. Canada is where jazz was.
Oh, neat.
Mexico had been wiped out
Hmm.
because they're like, hey, we need more territory. Uh, in the same thing about women didn't have rights. They were fighting for men to stop sleeping with their slaves.
Oh, geez.
And the horror story was the guy was like, I'm a dissenter. What?
Hmm.
I'm an abolitionist. I believe that slave. And the woman's just screaming, "Oh my God, no, And then
Huh.
they had the slavery channel, like we have the history. They have the slavery channel where you could buy slaves.
Huh.
Like, oh my
Weird.
God. But
I
my
s-
point is, well, that goes with geekdom. I mean, come on.
yeah, well, yeah, I suppose film geekdom at the very least. But
Well,
your point about the movie was,
that's homogenized. They were so set in their ways. They just, I mean, the biggest political event wasn't the guy cheating on his wife. It was that he might be 1/8 black.
mhm.
I mean, it shows you how close-minded it could be because you can apply that to any country.
Well, and I think, like I say, America is struggling with that. I think right when America was starting to own and accept that it had done some not so nice things when it came to slavery and segregation, and not so nice things when it came to the native
Internment.
population. Sure, the not so nice things when it came to Japanese internment camps. There was this rejection because then people, I guess, felt bad. And because they felt bad, they were like, you're not teaching that anymore. Um, and obviously there were people that obviously took advantage and also purposely were trying to make people feel bad, which, I think that, there's a way for a country to own its history and be like, yeah, we really messed up there, and have it not and acknowledge it, truly acknowledge it. I mean, Watchmen, the comic book movie, television show, was how a lot of people learned about the Tulsa race riots, which was crazy to me because I knew about that when I was like 16. But that's because, black people that older black people in our families would tell us, oh, this thing happened and Rosewood happened and all of these things. And so we kept it alive. You weren't learning it in school. And so now they're not even learning the other stuff like in school because it's like, oh, that might make people feel bad.
Well,
Uh,
see, and that's the dishonesty because I mean, one of the things that I always thought being intriguing, because geekdom teaches you empathy.
sure.
Geekdom teaches you even by just reading. Because, the first thing I thought about World War II is a good example. I
Mhm.
thought about the person who came over here from Germany in 1920, 1930,
Mhm.
and then had to go face his brother or cousin on the front.
Sure.
I mean, people don't think about that, but you have to think about that. Or think about there were 40 Hitlers in the New York pages, white
Sure.
pages, before
Sure.
World War II. All
Sure.
of a
There
sudden, you
was
can find any.
Sure, there was a documentary that talked about, the sort of, I forgot what it's called. It was a PBS documentary, I believe, on fascism in America prior to World War II, where there was this German league that was, they met at, I think it was Madison Square Garden, and had a huge bunch of people there. And one of the jokes we make in That's So Quantum has to do with, Charles Lindbergh being a super stand for Hitler and
Yeah, same as
fascism. And
same as
fascism.
Henry Ford was, same as Disney was, I think. But I know
Yeah,
Henry Ford was.
yeah, Henry Ford for sure. Well, and I guess that sort of dovetails into um a bit of the topic for today, um, which could be, I mean, loosely, we could either go into the dangerousness of being a geek and
Oh, that's
historically.
definitely it because, in the 80s, Revenge of the Nerds was no joke.
Sure,
It
sure. And,
was no joke.
and I think that the dangerousness of geekdom, up until real recently, and probably still somewhat recently, is that, we are traffickers in stories, whether it be kaiju stories or comic book stories or sci-fi stories or fantasy stories. And a lot of these stories can have, sci-fi stories for sure, can have some real transgressive ideas in them. Some challenges to the status quo. I mean, anybody who's read any of Dune, which I hope the director Villeneuve gets to make more Dune films, because that story gets pretty interesting. It gets into places like, maybe don't have messiahs, maybe don't have single heroes. So it inverts the hero myth quite a bit in the stories of Dune. But the dangerousness of some of this, of being a geek, really is you are a trafficker in some of these stories that are going to get banned, are going to get challenge the status quo, and really, cause some people some significant problems. Because part of geekdom, I think, particularly fantasy geekdom, cosplay, sci-fi geekdom, is that they were always accepting of different races and different genders and different orientations, because they played with some of that energy in the stories. Ursula Le Guin had plenty of things to say about gender and stories. Uh, Gosh, I'm
Well, that was
thinking.
one of the best points about role playing, just straight
Yeah,
up role playing.
yeah,
Role playing, you weren't concerned about the sexuality of the elf. You knew they were a certain way. You're just like, I don't care. We're just not around them when they're drunk. And I mean, that's literally what your character would say. Or you didn't care about races for the same reason, because we're trying to stop the ogre or the troll or the dragon or the beholder or whatever.
sure. Well,
So we don't have time for that.
and you had Octavia Butler, with the Parable of the Sower and stuff. So they were dealing with some of the race stuff. Lots of things deal with, sort of a post-apocalyptic, post sort of fascist existence. I mean, The Man in the High Tower for Philip K. Dick. All of these things. And, you look at Lord of the Rings, it was these small, mostly peaceful, mostly concerned about their stomachs group of hobbits, way away from all of the action of the elves and the humans, that ended up really being the decisive uh element of winning over Sauron. And
Well, what you say is absolutely true. And it's one of the things, I think one of the things that people don't understand, being a geek is an agreement. And what I mean by an agreement, we know, okay, I'm a kaiju geek. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm,
Where I'm going, but you have those who are horror geeks.
mm-hmm,
They like seeing a body torn apart or something like that. That's not my jam, but I respect their jam. I
mm-hmm,
don't sit there and condemn it. I just say that's not for me, or I don't agree with it, or it's not. Because to me, it's the same as like, you have sometimes the kitty sci-fi they'll have.
mm-hmm,
And you see it once in a while. They actually have kitty sci-fi for
mm-hmm.
those like below the age of 8.
Sure.
And again, some of that's too sappy for me, but I appreciate who it's for. And I
Well,
think that's one of the things about the mainstream public is that when they want to make all these decisions, they don't understand. I mean, it doesn't matter how disturbing it is.
mm-hmm,
Even you sit there and go, God, I hope that was quick. Or God, I hope they recover mentally afterward. You
sure.
know,
Well, and I think,
it,
go on.
no, I was just gonna say my point was just valid. Of they got to learn how to accept that. That's one of the biggest problems in the other cultures. They're so busy. Well, we don't want this, but yet you're not understanding why geekdom exists.
Well, and I think, there's plenty of ink that might be spilled on, is it a group of people who have sort of held on to adolescence a bit too long? Is it a group of people that, have some issues with maturity, whatever that means? And I think that if people were to be on the inside of some of this stuff, they would see that these are stories that really can be transformative, that can really speak to the human condition in ways that are less cliche. I mean, they might be cliche within the context of whatever geek property it is, but they certainly have they speak to the human heart in some way. And I think that if sort of mainstream Western society hadn't sort of driven itself into a bit of a creative ditch with certain sort of concepts, and become super tropey, maybe people would not be looking at some of these other expressions of story. But the danger of being a geek, I think that for those of you ladies and gentlemen that are out there listening, who are maybe half our age or younger, uh, there certainly was a period of time when liking any of this stuff would have you routinely mocked. Now, I'd love to hear anyone and any comments, reply to us, drakestorm@gmail.com or that'ssoquantum@gmail.com. Send us some emails about whether or not it's still hard out there for a geek. But
Especially ones of color.
yes, but I think that when you are talking about how dangerous it was to be a geek when you in the 80s, that's a whole nother scene. It really, really
yeah.
was. Now I see people who, I almost think some people are bragging about being neuroatypical.
Well, I think
Being
part of it
on
is that you'll see
being
people run around with tattoos because my obscurity of social interaction, I start picking up keys
sure,
and you'll see a tattoo, you go, is that from Gears of War? And the guy's face will get big as a pumpkin. Yes, it is. I
yeah,
never played that game in my life, but I know the symbol and that starts a conversation.
sure.
As
Like
far as he's concerned, I play it every day.
sure. Well, and you see sometimes people with Quake tattoos. You see Legend of Zelda, tons of those. You'll actually see the triangle that's from Harry Potter as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that it has become much more mainstreamed. But there was a period of time where, yeah, you'd get stuffed in a locker, you'd get called homophobic names, you'd get beat up, you would all of these things, and to even find the stuff was a bit of a chore. Try being an anime fan in 1989,
Oh,
as
the answer
opposed
is
to
very
just
simple. They had the sci-fi, they had a sci-fi convention, and the sci-fi convention would have the interactive table
sure,
before the internet is now, and definitely before Meetup.
sure,
And they would tell you where they would have the anime Denver Animation Club.
sure,
And they would rent out a room and they would put in some videotape, and you either fall asleep halfway through it or you watch it, or they
sure.
let you borrow it later. One of the three.
And if
And
you were really hungry for the content, but yeah, you were getting it on VHSs occasionally.
yes, or beta.
You
Sorry, not
might,
love beta.
yeah, Beta. RIP. Pour one out for Betamax. Yeah, but I mean, there was a real period of time where it was hard not only liking the stuff, but even having access to the stuff. I am gonna probably keep bird dogging Chuck Wazansky, who is the owner and main man at Mile High Comics. That's the only reason why we had such a comic book situation in Colorado is he had a chain of these comic book stores. And because there was a chain of comic book stores, there was a chain of competitor stores, not a chain, but there were a bunch of competitors that would also compete to get your comic book dollar. So you could get some manga there. You could get certainly your comic books there. And there were plenty of that was one of the few bright lights in being in Colorado is you could at least go to Mile High and you could or
oh
any
yeah,
of its competitors and get some comic books and stuff like that. And like I said, manga, you'd hard pressed to get a manga for a real long time. And now, you can go to Barnes and Noble. My daughter just picked up, Berserk and Parasite and some other manga that she was really wanting to check out. So yeah, the danger was that you couldn't even get your fix in addition to being beat up.
well,
So,
it's not just that. Also, we had the other enemy, which was faith, certain faiths. Like for instance, I went and got Dungeons and Dragons when I was younger.
oh yes, the
Basic set.
Satanic Panic.
Yes, and my mother was thinking, but I got to give her credit where credit's due, asked me why I liked it. And my
Okay.
father, give him credit where credit's due, they asked me why I liked it. I said, I just like the dragons. What was it? What's the truth?
Well, and
Because I had nobody to play with. I just liked the dragons and I like reading what they were doing.
those
But
books, I mean, were expensive too. It was really D&D, gosh, back in the day was you could get the blue box or you could get the red box. And
the red box
people,
was $15. The
yeah,
blue box
but
was 20, and then the final one's 25.
yeah, but when you're talking 1983 dollars, 1983 dollars, that might as well have been, that would be like, oh,
50.
that'd be like $50 now, probably.
Yeah.
I mean,
And
$15. You're talking about comic books. Comic books were at the same time were 50 cents. So if you were able to get
50 to $1.25 in the 80s, 50 to $1.25.
yeah, when I remember it hung out at 50 cents for a long time. And then I remember it went up to 60 and like your annuals would be 75 cents, remember? And maybe you'd get
Right.
like an extra giant one that'd be $1. Like I think
Right.
some of those big extra thick World's Finest or
Right. And
72
the
page
biggest one they
giants.
had was the Treasury. The Treasury were the ones that were size of the Rocky. We're going to show our age being out here in Colorado. Rocky Mountain newspaper.
Yes, right. Yeah, like I still have the Superman Spider-Man
Right.
sort of
That was one of them.
treasury
And then they had a
edition.
Batman and the Hulk.
And then they had didn't they have a Muhammad Ali and Batman or
Yes.
something like that?
It was Muhammad Ali and Superman.
Superman, yep. So
And
very 70s.
that was Neil Adams because he had everybody he could. He put in that cover.
Isn't that wild, Neil? Pour one out for Neil Adams. Didn't he die? What was it, last year or a year before? It wasn't that long ago.
It was the year before, towards the end.
Yes.
Like December, November.
And we were really lucky in Colorado because he was pretty consistently at comic conventions here. I didn't know if he lived out here or close, but like he was always at Denver Comic Con, which no longer Comic Con. I guess it's called Fan Expo.
You're showing your age again.
Right, and he was at Comic Fest. That Comic Fest shows my age. Comic Fest was before Comic Con, which was before.
Majesticon.
Yep, those were before. Those were before even Denver Comic Con, which is years ago at this point, because now it's been Fan Expo for I don't know how many years now.
Two.
But feels like it's been longer than two. Feels like 2020 is when it changed.
Yeah, it might be, but they
anyway,
don't understand that you had the faith problem. Then you had the race problem. Certain races did not appreciate it.
Sure.
Some didn't appreciate because they're like, what are you doing in our lane?
Sure. Let's unpack that.
Fantasy?
Yeah. Let's unpack that a little bit because I think that we're going to tell you about the dark ages of being a dark fan.
Well, let's before we do that, I want to do one more thing about geekdom. Music wise, what song actually has a trilogy?
The song has a trilogy, like a suite?
No, actually has a trilogy, like a movie.
Huh. I give up. I probably know, but
El Paso.
Who? What?
El Paso.
El
Paso is a trilogy. Yes.
By who?
I Lost My Heart in El Paso.
Oh, yes.
Yes. It actually is a trilogy.
Well, there you go.
Okay, back to being. I'm sorry, I had my geek moment there.
Sure, back to serious geekdom. So we were going to talk about the dangers of being the dark ages of being a dark geek, but you had another concept that you were going to unpack first.
Well, that was it. Basically, that was it.
The trilogy.
Yeah, because most people, they don't know there's a trilogy there. And I'm like, as a geek, that was my little bonus. Hey, there you go.
Terrence, I wouldn't open with it. Make that later in your set for sure. I wouldn't open with it. So
I had to have something light before we go to the darkness, man. This was dark.
Well, it's not super heavy, but I think that listeners might appreciate. This is where we will show a bit. We've been showing our age for this entire episode, but there is this notion. Because right now, 80s nostalgia seems to be hitting pretty hard. Like you'll have music that's dark wave, synth wave that basically sounds like, soundtracks from old cyberpunk type anime from back in the day in the 80s and early 90s. And part of that sort of 80s nostalgia is the television show Stranger Things. And I dig Stranger Things, but let it be said that them playing D&D, they get the geekness right with the most recent season about how with the Hellfire Club, that you would be super ostracized, and I would say a fair share of the people I played D&D with in the early 80s were all heavy metal kids. My close friend Mike was, he had, I don't know, dozens and dozens of painted pewter figures that he would paint, and he was always the DM. And I remember that was listening to Dio nonstop. But in general, if you were black, and I think many of our African American listeners will testify to this, is that
If you're 45 and older,
there's a whole Christian thing. Like the black church is deeply embedded in black consciousness, and we were probably some of the first blacks to make it out to the suburbs. That early 80s migration of making enough money maybe to actually move to the suburbs, and the suburbs being, because I remember all of my friends in high school and junior high, it was like everyone was moving from everywhere else to move to this suburb, which at the time Aurora was this very pristine middle class suburb. It's now not so much that in Aurora,
yeah, it looks
Colorado.
like New York.
Yeah, escape from New York, maybe. No, it's not that bad, but it is definitely different. And because the black church was so fundamental and foundational within black culture, having a big demon-looking thing, which was actually an Ifrit, on the Dungeon Master's Guide, or the demon statue that is in the player's handbook. These were huge red flags for people.
Don't forget the class. Don't forget about having the class assassin.
Sure, and the deities and demigods book. It's like, what? Like, people talk about religious fundamentalism now. Imagine if the religious fundamentalism then was just much more pervasive. Now, I think the dominant religious category that people belong to now is unaffiliated or agnostic or something like that.
They believe in a higher power. They just don't believe in religion of the church.
Sure. And I imagine,
I know, because I'm one of them.
Sure. Well, and I think that the satanic panic looms large in that, because, in the 1980s, I mean, Judas Priest went to trial. Ozzy Osbourne went to trial. It was like, they tried to nail everyone with lyrics when it came to
Vampire the Masquerade was in the 90s, but still they were, because one of the players went nuts.
Sure.
And then
and for those of you
back in the day when you could actually call and talk to people, I talked to Steve Jackson, and he was talking about, he was still mad. It had happened like 5 years. This was in the 90s. It happened 5 years before, where the CIA had confiscated all their gamer books because it was too realistic.
Well, yeah. If you see Vampire the Masquerade, for those of you, ladies and gentlemen, that are too young to have known about this, that there was, when D&D first started getting kind of popular, and then they had that Tom Hanks D&D movie, There's Blood Up My Knife. Early Tom Hanks television vehicle.
Monsters and Mazes.
Yep. Where people were playing D&D were murdering. Anyways, there was a whole bunch of other role-playing games that came out in a sort of explosion at that time. Did Catan come out at that time?
No, they came out in the 90s.
Okay, well, so 90s, still kind of a little bit later. You had
they had Killer to come out. And that inspired the movie Tag.
Yeah.
With Leonard Hamilton and Robert Carradine.
Did you
inspired that.
Gamma Wars was in there?
Yeah, Gamma Wars came out in the 80s.
Sure.
And see, one of the things that people don't understand is that, if you notice, this is an observation. Keyword observation. Observation. You go to geek conventions, you'll notice that blacks of a certain age are not with a black partner.
Um,
And it's because during that time period, not many of us always go there.
well, I think that if so, that first wave of minorities that entered the suburbs, their parents were maybe from the inner city or from the south, and their kids are going to school. Like Blackish, the television show talks about it, but it's
Yeah.
arguably, I think, a little late because I like that really that first wave of that happening was really the 80s, I think. Because, there was still plenty of people. I had tons of relatives that were in Linwood, Inglewood, California. I had tons of relatives that were in Kentucky and Louisiana. And my parents sort of, instead of going all the way to California, stopped in Colorado. Thank heaven. Because, I think
Cheaper.
yeah, well, and boring, but that boring was a good thing to grow up in. And so, yeah, I was surrounded by, mostly Anglo people. There was certain folks from different Asian backgrounds. My closest friends were Filipino and Chinese and Jewish and, white and black.
What high
So
school did you go to?
I went to Gateway High School. Now people can find
Ah,
me. Now
and
they can.
how many were there?
Oh gosh, I feel like there was probably 300 in each class, like
Okay. I went
freshman.
to Smoky Hill High School.
Oh, you went to Smoky
There
Hill.
and there were 1,200 students in the whole school.
Yeah,
There were
I feel like that's about how many
seven
we had too.
seven black guys and 11 black girls.
I feel like it was pretty close to that for a while at Gateway. I mean, every black person knew every other black person, and I was the weird black person that was hanging. I wasn't playing any sports, which eliminated me from 70% of the black dudes. And
Yes, it did. Got rid of your black card that moment, huh?
yes,
I
I
know
didn't
because I
didn't
did the
wasn't
same
play.
thing.
I
I don't
was
like basketball.
well, I didn't discover sports until probably 2 decades ago, but I think that yeah, probably about 2 decades ago. Is that right? Yeah, about 2 decades, maybe. I mean, liked martial arts and did martial arts early on, but I think that actual sports I couldn't stand it. But I was also a little smaller. I wasn't like I was probably 5'3", 5'4" in high school, probably. So that was a little smaller than most folks. By the time I got to senior year, everybody was cool with everybody for the most part. And when I went to my high school reunion, I was cool with everybody there too. I arguably had more gray hair than some folks, but but in general, I was thinner than virtually all the dudes. but but
Touche.
I definitely it was actually a good experience because there were people, a lot of my friends. I had there were people I was friends with in middle school, going to Aurora Hills Middle School. We were all close. All the guys were close in at Aurora Hills. That was pre-geekdom. Even though geekdom was expressing itself, it was pre people really stratifying in that way. So I had friends that turned into jocks in high school. And what was interesting about I guess it was the 30th high school reunion, is that all of my friends that were friends from middle school that I lost touch with, but was kind of sort of close to in high school, those were the best conversations I had. But anyway, back to geekdom. Uh, so,
One of the
being
reasons
black.
I like kaiju. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, just so I was already kind of nerdy anyway, and most of my friends, we were listening to nothing but new wave and punk, so I wasn't even listening to a heck of a lot of hip hop. I was listening to Prince. Everybody listened to Prince.
Oh
Uh,
yeah.
I mean, I was a freshman when Purple Rain came out, so uh, and I remember people dressing like Prince, which was kind of funny. But anyways, so liking geek stuff was kind of dangerous, and I got bullied. I got bullied mostly though by people that I didn't know in middle school. So the people that didn't that knew me in middle school and then were cool with me at the reunions, those people didn't bully me. But people that I only knew in high school, or met in high school, those people bullied me. So, and I was being a theater kid, listening to New Wave, so, and being a geek, collecting comic books, wearing Batman t-shirts. Because, ladies and gentlemen, while you can get your Flash and your Marvel Comics t-shirts at Target now, you literally had to order or go to Mile High Comics, one of the comic stores, and hope they had hope they had your size, and it was mostly Batman. They had
No,
Batman
what you're saying is
t-shirts,
true.
they had Batman shirts, they had Superman shirts. That was it.
Now, see,
Until later on, until the geek thing started getting well underway in the 90s. And in the 90s, you got some more stuff.
one of the reasons I like kaiju is because I'll be very honest, that my first water cooler moment. See, everybody has their first water cooler. I was like 8 or 9,
Okay.
and we all saw Godzilla in the syndication movies, and we're like, oh my goodness, oh yeah. So
Well,
that's where that comes from. But I
w-
mean, what people understand, the geekdom in general, some cultures embrace it, some don't, and some embrace it later.
well, and that's the thing is like if you had told a 14-year-old me that everybody on planet Earth would know who Tony Stark is, I would have laughed at you in your face because I would have said they might know who Peter Parker is, but they're never going to know who Tony Stark is. And now everybody knows who Tony Stark is because it was Robert Downey Jr., Iron Man in every Marvel movie. So, but the thing about geeks, and I think this has to do with any number of subcultures, they tend to be ahead of the curve for a long time, and it's dangerous to be ahead of the curve because it's challenging. It challenges sexuality, it challenges racial identity, it challenges, notions of thought and philosophy, and then it just becomes mainstream. And then you have people like, Martin Scorsese and everybody else complaining there's too many superhero movies. And,
But then, if we go around and say there's too many gangster movies, how would he react?
well, yeah, I mean, goodness gracious, there's been gangster movies. What, James Cagney? How long ago is
Yes,
that? Yeah,
the
it's
East
like,
Side Kids, even
yeah,
though they weren't kids, they were our age in some cases, playing kids.
sure,
I mean, come on.
sure, sure. I mean, and and I would level that. Gosh, I wish I could become more famous because that would be the first thing I would say. I would say, Mr. Scorsese, I am sick to death of gangster films, particularly Italian ones. But you don't see me saying we should never make any of them because, I've seen and loved The Godfather 1 and 2. Didn't like 3 that much. Didn't even watch all of 3. I've certainly liked Casino and Goodfellas. I've certainly liked any number of The Sopranos. I've certainly liked these things. But if we're going to talk about something that is literally driven into the ground, it would be the gangster pick. But that said, cultures, yeah, don't, that it would the dangerousness of being a geek in the 80s and in the 90s was it wasn't really accepted. There wasn't
It wasn't accepted
popular.
by our race.
No,
And to a degree, that could be, we once said this between ourselves out of the podcast, that it could be, and this is going to get me in trouble, it could be the slave mentality, as in carried on from that time period, that it really has no practical means in the practical sense, even though it does have a practical means because it helps you in some cases to go on and not do something stupid.
Yeah, certainly. And, and I think that, if you're an only child like I was and you're in the suburbs, there was a whole period of time where I wasn't making any friends because I didn't know anybody yet. And so I was reading Ray Bradbury. I had friends at school, but I didn't know where they lived or things like that. There were some kids in the neighborhood that I got close to, and we would talk about comics and everything else. There's 2 kids, Paul and Brian, don't remember their last name. Man, they would steal everything that wasn't tied down. And they were kind of a richer family because they already had all the Atari games, all the Star Wars games, all the Star Wars figures and play sets, tons of comics, but they would they would steal anything not tied down. My parents knew kind of because they were like, they can't come in the house. They were the first. They were the first kids. These were white kids. These are the first kids I ever saw curse at their parents. It blew my mind because it blew my mind when people joke about black people seeing white people curse at their parents. That's what happened to me. I was like, "What?" He told his mother, "What?" I would get the taste slapped out of my mouth. They were what? They had every GI Joe, everything else. So I had comic book friends that were them, but they eventually became kind of metal kids, and that was before I ever liked heavy metal. But that was it. So you would get comic books tossed out of your hand or pushed or whatever else, or
My
uh,
books will get tossed out of my hand, or
and then you had your parents
or
throwing them away too. My mother
yeah, my
to this
father.
day still apologizes because I was like, you threw away some comic books that would buy a car now.
Yeah, my father, he did the same thing. We, matter of fact, we got into a fight about it when I was about 17. It's like, ugh. But there's those hormones there.
Sure, full of beans. Um, so yeah, I think that there was some actual danger there. And so for those of you that are able to look at, turn on Crunchyroll or Funimation and watch your anime, if you can wear your Naruto t-shirt in high school and be black, if you can cosplay as any number of Lord of the Rings characters or go to Comic-Con and dress up as any number of characters, you should tip your hat to some of these older geeks, these blerds, because it really was not that easy. So enjoy it.
Yeah, because I mean, they didn't know what to do with black characters,
no, they still don't.
and when they did, they went to one extreme to the other. Very rarely I mean, Blackula was probably one of the few black exploitation geek well done. Even with William Marshall, who did
Sure,
Daystrom, which shows you how advanced Star Trek was.
sure.
But then you have Black Jackal and Hyde, and that was the most "Are you kidding me?" movie,
Right,
where he goes
right.
from being, you know, Dr. Jackal, who's a black man, and becomes Hyde, who's a white man. I mean, okay, but
Well, at least they were trying something different.
oh, understatement. But I mean,
But
and then they had things that were not. I mean, this is totally off it to a degree. I mean, they back in the day they did Dracula's Dog, which I think is a good B movie. But why I'm mentioning that is they equally did one of Christy McNichol's movies that is still, it's one of those, they love the artisticness of it, but they hated the concept, if that makes sense.
sure, man,
You ever heard of
you
White
just
Dog?
I have not, but the fact that you mentioned Christy McNichol, ladies and gentlemen, you're gonna probably have to look her up. But Christy McNichol was to the 1970s and 80s in terms of a young woman
She was the Jodie
actress.
Foster for TV.
Oh, I wouldn't even. She would have been like I guess she would have been the Lindsay Lohan, really, of
Of TV. TV.
TV and movies in the 70s. I mean, she was in literally everything. I have a friend of mine, Melissa, who kind of vaguely looks like Christy McNichol, and she used to get teased about it, and every now and then she would sort of make her mouth sort of look sort of angled like Christy McNichol when she was trying to imitate her. It's quite funny. Those of you that look up Christy McNichol, and that's a friend. That's what my friend Melissa looks like, and she would have to make it so her mouth dipped at the down in one corner to make her look like her. And you'll know what I'm saying when you see her picture. But yeah, Christy McNichol. The fact you said Christy McNichol, that blows my mind. But go on. You were talking about
Well,
what
see,
is White
there's
Dog?
two, yes, and then see, this is the case, and one of the biggest problems in geekdom, true
Okay.
geekdom. Too many of the same title.
Sure. There's, I imagine you can
Okay, so
stick.
they
There's
have White Dog. That's a Hallmark movie with Hugh
sure.
Cronin and Jessica Tanti, and you
Okay.
could actually say is a supernatural geek movie.
Okay.
You really can.
How's a supernatural geek movie?
Well, the husband, his wife dies on him,
Okay.
And she dies like Tuesday, and about a week later, a dog shows up.
Okay.
And then you realize that it was brought there by his wife to be with him,
Oh, that's
spirit wise.
sweet.
That's what I mean, semi supernatural.
Oh, okay.
You know, nothing weird, but nonetheless companionship.
The white dog.
You know,
All right. Well, there you
yes.
go.
But then you have the other white dog with Chrissy McNichol.
Okay.
This is where Brian comes from and makes fun of on Family Guy. The
Ma-
dog is raised and bred to attack and kill blacks.
Oh, geez. And this was a Christy McNichols story?
Yes, yes.
Was she wanting it to attack black people, or was that just somebody
No,
like a previous order?
she stumbled across the dog and didn't know what it was.
And the dog just like Hank Hill's dog, that ladybird that was growling at the every time there was a black visitor, but it turned out she was just growling at anyone that came to fix his water heater.
Yes.
Yeah, I think
But yeah,
I do think, a side note, I think some people, I've noticed, it's sort of a funny thing that sometimes when white people are walking their dogs and their dog barks at you, they get super apologetic. It's like, I know that this dog's not racist, so they're colorblind. I don't think I'm not taking I'm not taking this like, oh, you're some closet racist and you've trained your dog to like Christy McNichols' dog to bark at me. Yeah, because
yeah. See,
how every now and then people get that weird flustered look that is only because of a racial issue.
well, that's what I'm saying. They played off of that
That
on the Family
extra
Guy.
fluster,
Yeah,
or like what Hank Hill was getting. It's the extra
right.
fluster. So
And you try to explain. It's like, no, that's
no, just
it's
this.
interesting. But yeah, her character just stumbled across the dog, and that's the whole plot of the movie is that she finds out that it was trained.
Hmm.
I remember I never saw it. I'd be a liar to say I saw it, but when we came out here from Detroit, it was just in time that we saw both the Detroit News, Free Press, and Denver Post and Rocky Mountain News all talking. They're like, "Don't go see it. Negative, negative, negative."
Well, not everything that Christy McNichol was in was a hit. Oh man, I'm sorry. Big yawn. It is that was a that might be a cue. We actually went an hour and a half today.
Oh, that's good.
So people will enjoy it. Do you guys enjoy our ramblings? It seems as though our people that are listening to this are increasing, but definitely send us your dangerous geek story. Because, like I say, I don't think it's necessarily over, but I do think that there's more access and more accessibility. I do think there's still people getting insulted. People use weeaboo as a slur for people who like anime. There's still, I think plenty of anti-geek sentiment out there. You know,
And
but
anti stay in your lane. Don't forget those.
the stay in your lane. There's still I don't know if there's not really much in the way of satanic panic like there used to be. I think the last gasp of satanic panic was Marilyn Manson with Columbine. They're like, oh my gosh, those kids were probably listening to Marilyn Manson's Antichrist Superstar, when in fact they were not listening to that at all. They were listening to Ramstein. I haven't listened to them, so I've only seen it written.
No, he
But
has more problems with sex accusations than being satanic.
yes, he turned out to be allegedly a very terrible person to what's the woman that acts in Westworld, Rachel A. Cook, I think. Is it her name? Isn't it Rachel? I no, that's not it. It's not Rachel A. Cook. That's the woman that was in um Psych, which I would love to do a Psych podcast. Maybe I'll do that at some point. Westworld actress. I'm typing it in because I'm tired of not having Evan Rachel Wood. That
Okay.
he did was not he did some not so allegedly, because I don't want to get in trouble, but did some terrible things to her. And she's a great actress, and I've enjoyed her in all the things. She was in she plays Madonna in the Weird Al movie.
Does she?
Yes. The one with Daniel Radcliffe.
Yes.
It's great. Because speaking of geeks, we'll end it there. He was representing flying the geek flag early on. So big up to mad praise to Weird Al, because Weird Al was a geek. You know, I mean, he has that song Riding Nerdy, right?
Well, not just that. I mean, anybody who knows the actual words to the Dick Van Dyke Show song.
Right? I mean,
Yeah.
I just Weird Al is a gosh darn national treasure. I would have said a curse word there, but I've kept this clean. There's so many expletives. If people listening to this must be like, wow, he's watches his speech. He doesn't say too much. I've been watching it, ladies and gentlemen. He doesn't
Trying not
curse.
to.
They
doesn't let
would
me
not
out.
they would not even know how much I curse in my regular life.
I don't
It's
curse. I don't have to. I use other words.
yeah, well, I don't. I like the tingle that curse words have on my tongue. But anyways, send us your geeky stories, the dangerousness of you being
And
a
go
geek.
watch UHF.
Watch UHF. Watch the Weird Al story, the one that just came out that has Evan Rachel Wood being Madonna, which is great. Daniel Radcliffe. I would actually own it. There's not many movies. Like I said, I don't watch a lot of movies over and over again, but I would watch that. It actually has people playing Frank Zappa and Captain Beefheart, if I recall correctly. Anyways, watch that and enjoy your world of geekdom. And again, you can find Terrence at drakestorm@gmail.com. You can find me at thatsoquantum@gmail.com or drupq108 send me a letter. We're doing this for the love. We love to hear some love back, so please like and or subscribe on YouTube or on Spotify or on Apple or anywhere you get this podcast. And with that, we'll sign off and say, don't be a stranger.
Just be strange.
And take care. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Ah.